Welcome to Themis Podcasts. Themis is a leading technology platform that helps clients manage their financial crime risk exposure through a combination of innovation, insight, and intelligence. Our podcasts aim to bring you insight, views, emerging trends, and thought leadership from industry leaders and our own financial crime experts. Find out more about Themis at crime.financial. In this podcast, we talk to Dominica Benton, a PhD candidate whose research focuses on the use of cryptocurrencies in terrorist financing and the use of distributed ledger technology within the suspicious activity reporting regime in counter-terrorism financing, about the use of cryptocurrencies, online gaming, and the Metaverse in terrorist financing activities. We discuss what has been referred to as the gamification of terrorist violence, a trend where those involved in terrorist financing are making more use of virtual worlds, video games, live streaming platforms, and virtual currencies to finance terrorism. Dominica also gives a breakdown of the dark web, the future of virtual means of terrorist financing, and advice for staying vigilant on social media.
Welcome, Domi. It is amazing to talk to you today to get your unique perspective on cryptocurrencies, terrorist financing, and gaming possibilities. So just to give some background, the gamification of terrorist violence and the use of cryptocurrencies, especially when it comes to youth, is an increasing trend. Terrorists are actively involved in the online gaming community and the use of different virtual currencies. And recently, we've been seeing different platforms such as Twitch, different video games, other apps, live streaming services, and even the use of cryptocurrencies having more of a social media dimension. And these platforms, these apps, these currencies can be used for a range of activities, and these definitely include terrorist financing. It's also important to note that there's a huge target audience for young people who tend to be more vulnerable and more interested in exploring these different possibilities. So again, Domi, thank you so much for joining us. It's just amazing to have you. I've talked to you once before about terrorist financing cryptocurrencies, and the discussion was brilliant. So it's amazing to continue this. So I was just wondering if you could start us off with just another introduction of yourself, and then an overview of your research if possible.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the introduction, Conchali, and thanks for having me. Great to speak to you again. I guess overall, you've done the great introduction. I'm pursuing my PhD on a part-time basis. Quite early on in my career, in terms of research, started back in October. But namely what I am looking at is the use of cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, among others, and growing cryptocurrencies in the use of cryptocurrencies in financing terrorism, terrorist organizations, or terrorism in general, and also looking at the use of blockchain technology. So that's the basis behind cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin in suspicious activity reporting. So essentially looking at the regulatory technology aspect within counterterrorism financing specifically.
Okay, thank you so much. That sounds really interesting. Could we delve deeper into blockchain and terrorist financing? Because I know this is part that even the experts sometimes don't really comprehend it fully. So I would love if you could just go through that, just a general overview quickly.
Yeah, so we've got, in terms of using cryptocurrencies for sponsoring terrorist attacks, you've got, just to give a few examples, the Capitol attacks, was it last year? Time flies by, I'm losing track of time, to be honest. They have found over $500 million worth of Bitcoin in a wallet. That was from a French donor. So we have that link, obviously, for the sponsoring of the Capitol attacks or the riots. The German market attacks have been alleged to have been sponsored through Bitcoin. Similarly to the Paris attacks, to Charlie Hebdo attacks, It is a growing threat. When I say alleged, it's because due to the pseudonymous, I guess, nature of blockchain and therefore cryptocurrency transactions, it's difficult to trace as to, it's not impossible, it's difficult to trace those transactions to the sender, and therefore has that money and has that essentially been used, has that transaction been used towards terrorist financing purposes or carrying out a terrorist attack, or in general funding the organization to carry out those attacks, pay their employees, as you've got organizations such as Al-Qaeda or ISIL that work in that sort of rigid employer kind of structure, where terrorists do get their monthly or weekly salaries. But in essence, there is that risk and exploitation of the, I guess, the perks that cryptocurrencies offer for terrorists to use in order to go unnoticed. And at this current moment in time, whilst companies or organizations that, at least within the EU and within the UK, that do provide that virtual currency or cryptocurrency to fiat currency exchange services, need to be registered with within the UK, it's the Financial Conduct Authority, for anti-money laundering purposes and for anti-money laundering regulation purposes. Cryptocurrencies alone aren't regulated, hence why the risks of being or going unnoticed and undetected is a great disguise for terrorists to use that avenue.
Okay. It's interesting to talk about going undetected. So do you think that it's so much more accessible now for people to get to use virtual currencies, cryptocurrencies, and what do you think has made it so accessible, if it has?
So, for instance, in the US, it's just a great example to give. To be honest, a person who I can't remember how old they were, but somewhere in between 16 to 24, was using Twitter to promote the use of, or how to use Bitcoin to terrorist organizations, namely and specifically ISIL. So in terms of how they go undetected, it's due to the nature of cryptocurrencies and the blockchain technology itself. So whereby all the transactions that do take place within, just let's say Bitcoin as an example, they are recorded on what you call a distributed ledger. So the umbrella technology is a distributed ledger technology. Blockchain technology is part of that. It's under the same umbrella in essence. So blockchain tech is distributed ledger, and all the crypto related transactions, all the Bitcoin transactions, all recorded on this massive network. What the difficulty is if, let's say, you register with Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency, you are not necessarily, let's say, you're not Concelli, I'm not Domi, you use a different name or nickname in order to go into these transactions. You've got other things such as IP address changes that then confuses the system. So in terms of tracing a given transaction, instead of, say, it actually coming from within the UK, it will confuse the system and show it actually comes from, let's say, I don't know, France, for example. So that just gives terrorists that more, I guess, a bigger option and big avenue to go unnoticed due to the, I guess, the confusing factors.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned Twitter. So a few days ago, crypto was actually trending on Twitter because people were saying that it's not as trendy as it was. And the hype has died down for the use of cryptocurrencies. What do you think of this? I just wanted to know your opinion on because it was a major topic. So what's your opinion on this? Do you think that it was kind of really hype driven to use this and like, oh, let's talk about this in the realm of terrorism, let's talk about this in the realm of money laundering and also gaming? Do you think it was hype driven and it's going down, or do you think really people are genuinely using this? And obviously some people are talking about it for hype, but this is a serious issue. Like, what is your opinion on this?
In the news, it has, but in terms of it still being a risk within counterterrorism financing, I'd say so. It remains a huge risk, whether it's within gaming, Metaverse, or otherwise. And I think what's important to mention is terrorists are responsive, and they are 2 steps ahead, or at least they try to be 2 steps ahead. And a great example, I'd say, is when prior to the 9/11 attacks, Al-Qaeda was anticipating to be sanctioned by several different countries and states. And what was suggested and found was that many of the proceeds were actually hidden in the illicit trade of diamonds from Sierra Leone.
Wow.
So the fact that back in during the 9/11 attacks, they anticipated that sanction step to be taken, the fact that crypto's now going out of hype could be a better avenue for them to explore, because it's a bit quieter. Therefore, from the regulation perspective, who's to say people that do review those suspicious transactions are slightly more laid back because it's less of a hype.
I see. Okay, thank you so much for that point. Yeah. I realized that some people who may listen to this will be very new to the topic. So is it possible you take me step by step through how a terrorist would potentially use cryptocurrencies for financing? Just a very basic like breakdown of how they may go about this.
Okay. So whether, for instance, you'd use for set up an online wallet, so an online account, you would convert your cash into Bitcoin. Don't know what the current exchange rate is at the moment, but in essence, you can then send a number of Bitcoin to a different address. But in order for this sender to do that, and the other person receiving it, you need to give them a key in order to receive that Bitcoin or that amount of Bitcoin at the other end. So it's a very almost private transaction, but it is to a certain extent, that exchange. So it's almost like within perhaps the gaming industry, whereby you convert your cash into something non-fungible and non-tangible, and then use that to send across to another person. All of this is, well, in the UK, we do require for these transactions to have an identity behind the sender and receiver. It's the addresses and the use of mixes that can complicate things and disguise that transaction. But in terms of that, let's say, person receiving the Bitcoin, that can then be used for whether it's payment for the terrorist organizations or purchasing items. Many online marketplaces now do accept virtual currencies as a method of payment. That includes PayPal, Microsoft, Twitch as well, and many others. So the fact that these are now accepting cryptocurrencies as a means of payment, that's something terrorists could potentially go into using in order to, again, disguise where the money has come from and output for terrorist purposes.
Okay.
In simple terms.
Yeah, and so thank you so much for that, because I realize sometimes that we kind of just talk about it some people it's very abstract though, you know,
Mm.
it's not even when you go through it, it may not be easily understood because it's so new to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's such a kind of a close, I don't say like a close community of like, oh, people who understand crypto and they understand Bitcoin. And then if you're outside of it, you kind of avoid it because it's getting too complex. So I appreciate you going through it, giving us a breakdown. Also, in my research on crypto, I was seeing that there are more, like even more undetectable kinds of virtual currencies being developed. So I wanted to know, what do you see for the future of cryptocurrency use for terrorist groups and for terrorist financing activities? Like, what do you see for the future of this?
I think, like you said, the anonymity or pseudonymity aspect of it can be greatly developed. So back a few years ago, there were side, I guess, blockers, if you like, such as Bitcoin fog or the dark wallet that would, in essence, hide of that transaction from being visible. Or I think, as we discussed in our previous conversation, where they allow for an illegitimate transaction to piggyback on a legitimate transaction. So again, it's disguised. Bitcoin fog has been closed down since, but to give you an idea of statistics, something stupid like 90 or 95% of the internet is the dark web. So what we see, what we are able to use is just 5%, essentially. The remainder is something unseen to us. So in terms of things such as the dark wallet or Bitcoin fog, whilst, they've been since shut down, they continue. There is a risk and potential that these are on a continuous basis being developed in order to offer greater levels of anonymity.
I'm just going to pause the podcast here to let you know about Themis Search and Monitoring, a tool that will enable you to easily search, screen, and monitor your clients, suppliers, and third parties to check if they have any links to financial crime. We draw data from a wealth of sources, but also have our own proprietary Themis conviction data around different financial crime typologies, including terrorist financing. This makes Themis Search and Monitoring highly unique. Book a demo at crime.financial. You mentioned the dark web. Could you please go through exactly what this includes? Because that's the term that's like the dark web, and it's like, wait, what's the dark web? So could you please go through it for any listeners who may not be familiar or may know around it but not know exactly what the dark web is? Could you please go through that, please?
It's in essence the same use of the internet that we do. What it entails is, for instance, whether it's sale of weapons, sale of drugs, and otherwise. But the dark web is, imagine the use of our internet, our browsers, but there will be a different browser or an IP address changer. So if anyone can do this, to be honest, you can type in your own IP address into Google. Your IP address quite literally shows you on a map. You are identified by your Wi-Fi router or by your phone network. So when you go into Googling something, or whether it's on Facebook or use anything else, you are connected to this particular IP address. Your IP address doesn't change. Now with the dark web, you can have something such as an IP address changer. So it could be changing every 3 seconds, every 10 seconds, every second. So it jumps essentially from, as an example, from Indonesia to the UK, to Germany, to France, to the US. So every second the IP address changes, so you can't pinpoint exactly where those weapons, let's say, have been ordered. So if you go to, let's say you go on Amazon, you want to order yourself a new, I don't know, mug of coffee or something more exciting than this. I love my coffee too much not to mention it. Your IP address changes as their website progresses into your checkout, and then buying or purchasing the item with the IP address changer, I guess. It will confuse the system, so the numbers change, and it can't be, it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly where that transaction took place. So did the transaction take place in the UK? Let's say it actually has, but on the system it will come across as it's taken place in Indonesia.
Wow.
Just to give an example. So the dark web is, I guess the name is due to the fact that it's the difficulty of tracing, and it's the use of different browsers that average Joes don't necessarily have access to, that aren't tech savvy.
Yeah, well, it's just so interesting to see what occurs when you're just using the internet for, Instagram and research. And people do all kinds of things on the internet, because obviously this would be beneficial if you're involved in any kind of terrorist activity. This would definitely be beneficial. Thank you for going through that. So to pivot to gaming, during my research on just the different possibilities and evolution of the tech aspect of terrorism, gaming comes up quite a lot, especially now with these different like live streaming platforms, and just how the social media aspect of video games, it makes it more of a community aspect to things that used to be very, very personal, things that you would do individually because you were bored. Now it's a whole community and bringing people together, not always for the best reasons. So I just wanted to talk about that a bit. So when it comes to online gaming, how could that possibly be used for terrorist financing? And I'm talking about, live streaming of video games like Twitch, and also like multiplayer online video games like Fortnite, because I know that's really popular, things like that. Could we go through that a bit?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the gaming industry being used for terrorist financing, it's an area that's quite under-researched. From what I've seen, from what I've gathered, the gambling aspect of it, which I don't personally research, that's covered to a certain extent, but applying CTF directly to gaming, it's quite under-researched, and an under-researched area. In terms of the risks it poses, it's, I guess, looking at it from what we discussed as to how cryptocurrencies work. So how would you go about, how would a terrorist go about using cryptocurrencies? So in the same manner as you mentioned, Fortnite or other games, you would use real cash in order to purchase certain items in a game. And it's quite, I guess, known or obvious, or in a way logical, that in the large multiplayer games, it's very easy to communicate and it's very cheap to communicate through the internet. So what the gaming industry and gaming sites, I guess, offer is the scope for teenagers and younger people to be radicalized and potentially even recruited through the communication aspect of it. Now, in terms of the financing aspect of it, there's scope that legitimate or illegitimate funds can be used, as an example, to purchase items in Fortnite or other online platforms, and then say that account has a certain value. Who's to say that you can't then, and as some people do, sell their accounts? So whilst that I don't know, let's say loot box in Fortnite or something can't be converted back to cash, you can sell your account details, whether it's eBay or whether it's Facebook Marketplace, Twitter, anywhere else. People go crazy for these things, especially if you've got those limited edition items. So they'll, for instance, they could then pay you that cash. So whilst that's not directly terrorist financing, that person's just laundered potentially dirty money, and it comes out as clean.
Okay.
And I think what another risk to complicate things is, platforms such as eBay offer payments through PayPal. PayPal now extend to crypto, and you see where the whole loop is going.
Yeah, now I see the cycle. Why do you think this is so under-researched though? I mean, when it looks like an online gaming and the possibilities for terrorist financing, why do you think it's such an under-researched area?
In all honesty, I think people dislike talking about terrorism and terrorism financing. From personal experience, whenever you mention the words, it's silence. No one very rarely ever asks me about my research, unless I mention the cryptocurrency or blockchain part to it, in which case that's where the questions actually come from.
Okay.
But it's very rare. I personally get asked about the terrorism aspect, or counterterrorism financing in general, and whether it's because it's fresh and it's still in the news, the risk and is high, potentially that's why, and again, in terms of the legal aspect to it as well, it's I'd say it's under-regulated. The fifth AML directive that came into force 3-4 years ago now has made references to the gaming and gambling industries, but again, it's been quite slow in being applied. So whilst platforms such as Twitch that again do offer cryptocurrencies as a method of payment, cryptocurrencies aren't themselves regulated, but platforms that use cryptocurrencies will then have to be registered with the FCA, and they'll have to undergo the know your customer requirements, customer due diligence requirements. Is this transaction suspicious? Which again just takes you through the suspicious activity reporting, which, well, my argument lies that because of the human element to it and that manual oversight, how would you say, so you said transaction is suspicious. So taking Twitch as an example, many streamers, many gamers rely on that as perhaps a main source of income, gaming and receiving those donations.
Yeah.
Some of them will use it as a purposes of raising money for a charity. Now, traditionally, terrorists did use misapplied charitable donations for their own purposes. So whereby a Twitch streamer may say they are raising money for X charity, a portion of that donation in total could go to a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
Or you've got a streamer having money donated to for gaming. Again, someone donating that money and that cash could quite genuinely be donating them because they like how they're gaming or how they're performing, when in fact this person at the receiving end of it who's streaming that game could use the proceeds of that for terrorist purposes and withdraw that money, which they can physically withdraw that money into their own accounts from Twitch and send it off to wherever it needs to go for, again, terrorism purposes. So the risk is there, but in terms of why it's under-researched, I think it's a scary topic that people generally don't like talking about.
Yeah, no, I get that. It can be quite difficult to have transparent conversations about terrorist financing. And you even brought up how people could be thinking they're donating or they are giving money to their favorite gaming influencer or something like that, but they're really financing some terrorist activity. So that brings me to how impressionable some of the people who use these sites are, because lots of it is, like I said at the beginning, it's youth focused. Do you think that is a reason as well why it is kind of pushed to the side? Because it's like, oh, see, young people playing their games and people not really taking it so seriously that they could be involved in serious with actual consequences, activities with actual consequences. So can you tell me more about the youth aspects of of gaming and terrorist financing and the nature of this threat, please?
Of course. In terms of these people being namely teenagers or the younger ones in their early 20s, up to 30, let's say, let's take that generation as still young, in relation to, I mean, just as an example, a few years ago, a 13-year-old boy in the UK was arrested for purchasing a knife to carry out and was charged with planning a terrorist attack. So this is someone that's 13 years old. That's not gaming related specifically, but it shows that it's the younger generation that are targeted due to, I guess, the moldability to radicalize. In terms of gaming specifically, earlier this year, a Russian teenager, 16 years old, was charged and sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment for training for terrorist activities using what I think everyone will know as Minecraft.
Oh, wow. Yes. No, I know Minecraft. Yeah, I think I've even played Minecraft before.
Yeah. And whilst it sounds, what we've just been discussing, it sounds far-fetched that why would you donate money to someone you feel is genuine? But then again, it's the fact that someone in Russia or Siberia has been sentenced because they've been planning their attack in Minecraft. So that gives you a visual means of seeing what your attack has the potential of doing, which is something, I guess, for 9/11 and other attacks, they may not have had the options to do. So visualizing an attack in order to plan it, I guess to improve it, it gives great benefits to the younger ones, which, as I said, are more moldable to be radicalized by terrorists and by, I guess, things that they can be offered. So the fact that Minecraft has been used for such purposes, it opens up a scope that and proves that this is a risk, not just to the teenagers, but also on the online gaming platforms, especially with developments in technologies such as the use of the Metaverse, which is in essence a virtual environment for perhaps not just teenagers, but adults to use, and in essence lead a second, albeit a virtual life, just like Sims back in the day.
Yeah, well, even recently, because I still play Sims, so so yeah, I see. And I mean, with the metaverse as well, some of these things seem very like it's like a far away thing to talk about and to think of. But do you see that, like with technology being developed such as the metaverse, do you see that as an immediate threat? Or do you see...
most certainly. It again, as I mentioned before, I'd say terrorists are seeking opportunities, and Metaverse is not regulated. It's very new when it comes to those evolving technologies, new things. The law can't keep up to date, and I think the fact that Bitcoin and other virtual currencies that we've had over the number of years, this year we are expecting legislation surrounding economic financial crime and include cryptocurrencies. So it's taken a very long time to even have a mention of cryptocurrencies within regulations. And in terms of technologies such as the metaverse, it's an opportunity which at the moment it's unregulated. It just screams risk in terms of CTF.
Yeah. And just for any listeners who may not be familiar, Metaverse is like a virtual world, right?
Yeah, as I compared it in a way to Sims, but you you create your own avatar, and you quite literally lead a virtual life. So you log in, whether you go clubbing, or whether you go shopping, people spend a lot of money on that. So how Metaverse will work in that online environment is whereby you'll go to a nightclub and use cash or your bank card to purchase drinks. In the Metaverse, you will use non-fungible tokens. And in order to purchase non-fungible tokens, you need your own cash in order to purchase them. And you'll have, whether it's art, music in the Metaverse, just like in real life, you can purchase, and that will go for millions of pounds or millions of dollars. So again, I think it's just a huge opportunity, as bad as it sounds, to terrorists to exploit.
Yeah, it's so interesting how it's all connected, like gaming, virtual currencies, young people, even just the things you think are just fun, social media, and it's just like you're on it looking at things, and people are genuinely using this for their own activities. Like we're all doing different things with it. So it's when you explain the cycle of things, I just find it so beneficial, because if you didn't see the cycle, it'd be hard to understand how these could all be connected with each other and just not like interesting, trendy topics, you know?
It's same with, sorry, go on.
No, sorry, continue.
I was just going to say, in terms of, let's say, the Metaverse, I think, especially given COVID and how it's taught everyone to work remotely, again, that's another opportunity whereby they could utilize this environment in order to, whether it's communicate, meet up, and just like in the Russian example I've given you in Minecraft, plan out and practice attacks virtually, and then they have this visual way of seeing this is what can happen, or whether it's even teaching through the Metaverse that an ordinary person wouldn't think of. You log into Sims, why do you do it? You do it for fun. But people with an agenda will go, that's an opportunity for me to practice or explore.
Yes. So is there any advice you would give to people on navigating cryptocurrencies and gaming and these new technological possibilities in a safe way? For example, discussing it more on social media, like being more transparent about campaigns to maybe inform people in simple terms of how these things can happen, such as, being involved in terrorist financing, or being able to watch out for criminal activity using tech. So is there any advice you would give, anything that you would recommend?
I guess it's being vigilant as to what you're watching, what you're reading, and where your money's going to. So if, many people do set up just giving pages as an example. What's the purpose of that just giving page? And as silly as it sounds, many of us will go, well, this is for a legitimate purpose. I'll donate some money because my friend wants to do X, Y, and Z. It could be, again, someone else sharing that link on and using a different description and using that money for other purposes. So I think it's difficult to say don't be naive, because to a certain degree we all have to make mistakes in order to learn not to be naive. But it's through being diligent and careful as to where your money's going and what you're watching.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sure so many listeners will find that useful, because it's hard. It really is hard to be able to spot these things, and even reminders to stay aware. Genuinely, you can forget sometimes, especially if you spend so much time on the internet, or you're new to it as well, because not everyone is familiar with how to find their way around internet and what's legit, what's fake. It's because people getting smarter. It's getting way easier to just, do your own thing. So thank you for that. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I think we've covered everything, and it's been great for you to have me, so thank you.
Thank you for listening to the latest Themis podcast. If you'd like to find out more about Themis, please visit our website at www.crime.financial.